is something that's also kind of throwing a wrench into the works, right? Um, in the homeless community, I've had them talk to me about the abundance of fentanyl and who's doing it and who's not doing it, and that's so there's factions. It sounds like to me in the homeless community. Have you guys seen that? And is that a big barrier to access to services for people?
It's a huge
drug
barrier.
use in general, right?
Yeah, and fentanyl is a huge barrier, right? I mean, both in terms of overdose rates, just due to the potency of it, also just the intensity of the addiction, and it's more difficult for folks to successfully get through rehab and substance use treatment. I mean, talking about the warming center and then looking at fentanyl, one of the nights that I was out with one of my case managers and we were wandering around talking to folks over in Old Town, we actually came across a kind of yard area that had rocks in it. Someone had arranged the rocks to actually say, "Fetty killed my friends." And I mean, that was just an incredibly tragic and powerful moment to see that, because I mean, that's someone took the time kind of in their grief to talk about the fentanyl epidemic that we have right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's killing people left and right, which is really, really tragic and unfortunate. And I can't understate enough how important it is for everyone to have Narcan, and have training in Narcan. Being able to reverse an opiate overdose is incredibly important. I know EPD is going to a ton of calls for overdoses.
Yeah, I think I don't know the data right now, but at one point we had, I think, 40 something ODs in 62 days. So I mean, there's always been factions within our homeless population between those who use meth, those who use heroin. There's always it's kind of interesting within their own community they have their own factions. That, hey, at least I'm not doing heroin. Well, at least I'm not doing meth.
Yeah.
And so now, like, I think in the past maybe 18 months I've seen heroin twice. And we see it all the time, so we're only seeing fentanyl. You'll see meth, of course.
So it's kind of...
Oh, it's definitely, it's overtaken heroin.
Okay, I was scared to say that.
Yeah. And I think if you look at our drug task force, there are a lot of the recent cases. I think that's showing through that you're not seeing a whole lot of heroin. Again, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that realm.
Yeah.
I'm knowledgeable about it, but again, we're seeing fentanyl. It's being laced in methamphetamine. I mean, we've seen a ton of ODs.
It's sneaking into places that it wasn't before.
It is, yeah, and we've seen one individual OD 3 times in a month. That they revived him 3 times. We've seen places where CSET went out to an OD near Broadway, and they used a ton of Narcan, CPR, and the person just, once the ambulance got there, they gave, I'm not sure they did, but they gave more medical care, and the person came back to life immediately and was combative, and fentanyl's nasty, and once people get it's all about endorphins, and if people it makes you feel good. So if it's the best high you've ever had, the best feeling you've ever had in your life, and you want to have it again, that's all about endorphins with addiction.
Yeah. In one of the autopsy reports that I got, one of the and I'm only looking at transient deaths, but one of them was a fentanyl death and had been located in an encampment. So, yeah, that's got to be disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of our folks that we worked with recently. I was told, I think last week by one of person I work with doesn't work for the city, but works for another government agency, and said, "Hey, by the way, did you hear so and so died?" I'm like, "No," because he was doing better than he was before, and and it appears to be an OD death, and it was kind of like, here's a guy we worked with for years to get him in housing and to get somewhat whatever stabilized for him looked like, but I mean, you just never know.
Yeah, and drug addiction is really, it's a beast.
Yeah, it is, and I think that highlights, I think, one of the important things with opiate addiction in general is that, if folks have a period of time where they're in the hospital or they weren't using, or, even just a couple days, maybe they got booked into jail and they're being released 2 days later, just a couple of days is actually enough for the body's tolerance to opiates to decrease, and it actually puts them at a drastically increased risk of overdosing when they use again. And so, if someone is used to using a certain amount and then they get booked or they go to the hospital or whatever, and then they come out and they use that same amount, their overdose overdose risk, especially with fentanyl, is incredibly high.
Because
and,
their tolerance has dropped in that
Right.
time period of
Exactly.
abstinence.
Yeah, and so it increases their rate of respiratory depression and being a candidate for overdosing.
Yeah.
We see like one, because usually our Narcan pouch we all carry Narcan, but you usually have two doses, and usually the first back a couple years ago for one dose, okay, it worked, okay, now we need 2 doses, cool. Now we're at 4. Just a ton of Narcan to get reversals.
And that's indicative of the amount of drugs the person is ingesting? Or?
No. So fentanyl, without getting into a neuroscience lesson, opiates, chemicals have different levels of affinity for binding to brain receptors. And so fentanyl has a higher affinity than, say, heroin.
Okay.
And so the Narcan didn't have to work as hard to bump the heroin molecules off of the opiate receptors in the brain, whereas now you're needing significant
so
doses.
Fentanyl is just really, really scary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway.
I think it's scarier than most. Like people, for a while, people, fentanyl's not that dangerous. A couple years ago,
Yeah.
that was, people saying this is false in the media, it's not true, and now it's like, well, now we're seeing people die left and right.
Yeah.
I think was it last year we had 38 deaths from ODs. I think it was.
Oh.
I just saw. I think I saw the number. I think on some local media. That was 10 more than the year before. And so we're definitely seeing it, and the reversals are really high. But again, when we're using multiple Narcan dosages, and that's not working, and they have to go by ambulance. They start doing medications also.
Yeah.
It's nasty.
Right. Okay. Good grief.